O eternal and almighty God, from whom all power and wisdom come, we are assembled here before thee to frame such laws as may tend to the welfare and prosperity of our province. Grant, O merciful God, we pray thee, that we may desire only that which is in accordance with thy will, that we may seek it with wisdom and know it with certainty and accomplish it perfectly, for the glory and honor of thy name and for the welfare of all our people. Amen. Please be seated. Good morning, everybody. Orders of the day, private member's business. The Honourable Member for Rossmere.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. If you could call this morning for debate and second reading, Bill 210, the Wildlife Amendment Act.
It has been announced that the House will consider second reading of Bill number 210, the Wildlife Amendment Act, protecting property from water and wildlife damage. The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move second. I move seconded by the member from Dauphin that Bill 210, the Wildlife Amendment Act, protecting property from water and wildlife damage, be now read a second time and referred to a committee of this House.
It has been moved by the Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli, seconded by the Honourable Member for Dauphin, that Bill number 210, the Wildlife Amendment Act, protecting property from water and wildlife damage, be now read a second time and be referred to a committee of this House. The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm happy to be here today to discuss this nonpartisan legislation that's being brought forward. I guess I want to start with currently there's a substantial administrative delay with the process of requesting the removal of beaver dams or lodges or debris thereof from beavers. And this legislation is going to help clear that up by empowering local municipalities to help make the decisions if there's a problem beaver in the area, and obviously dams and lodges are the result of them. So right now there's substantial resources that are spent on from both departmental and conservation officers. The permits and the permitting process is a long drawn-out process, and I've spoke with farmers where some of them are years trying to get a permit in removing a beaver dam. So this legislation will allow these removals. They must occur in a timely manner. We're having a lot of farmers with crop damage and stuff as a result of dams. Water backs up on the land, drowns out alfalfa fields, for example. If a beaver dam is just off of a person's property and on a piece of crown land, the water still backs up on the farmer's land, and it takes a long time, and it's very time-consuming to get the permits through. And there's nobody that knows the watershed more than the local governments. So the municipalities or our local Northern Affairs districts, they pretty much, you can ask any one of the councillors or reeves or mayors as well. You can pretty much ask any one of them, and they know what direction and how the creek meanders or any waterway in their ward or in the municipality itself. So they're very knowledgeable. And with my discussions with both AMM and local reeves and councillors themselves, they're excited to have a timely result to removing them. And they're excited about this legislation and hope it moves forward today. So I was with a concern, a farmer. He took me up in an airplane, and we actually flew over some of these dams, and the thousands of acres of trees that were drowned out is astounding. So this isn't normal wetlands now. Like, we're talking, poplar trees that are 18 inches around at the base, And in the Inner Lake, that takes a long time for a tree to get to that size. And there's so much damage and wildlife area that has been destroyed over the years just by flooding out. So their application took many years to get through for the removal of that. And this is not only, sure, it's just trees, but it's habitat for bald eagles and maybe our provincial bird of a great gray owl as well. Like those are the ones that use the habitat in the boreal forest. And not to mention all the methane that's emitted from all of the drowning trees, and as it rots and decays, it releases a lot of methane. So I just want to point out that in consulting with the local authorities, they're actually excited to take this on. The AMM as well. Many years ago, I was still a councillor at the time, brought forward a resolution that moved in this direction as well to allow them to have their fair say on removing these administrative barriers that they face. So, and I also want to point out that harvesting of wildlife or beaver, it does not change. Like, this isn't a bill that allows an all-out war with beaver, but licensed trappers still have to be employed to harvest the beaver prior to any removal of the dam. Like, none of those laws will be altered or changed. And again, this is to prevent further damage and a timely solution. And the local governments, they deserve their fair say, of course. So it's so slow to get a permit right now. In the process, our conservation officers have to come out, look at the dam, find out where it is. That's if they can find it, because when on the permit you give a quarter section description of the section township range. So as we all know, like, that's a half-mile by a half-mile area, and it often takes a conservation officer a lot of time to find it. So where the local authorities, they can pretty much tell you, to how many paces in from each fence line it would be. They know exactly where it is, and this bill would allow those conservation officers to focus on more important things, like poaching of our wildlife, or there's the person out on the out fishing, maybe with barbed hooks or something like that, and they could focus on catching the people that are breaking the laws, and allow the local authorities to make decision on this. So I'm looking forward to a fulsome debate here today. And this is definitely a nonpartisan issue, and I know the members opposite, they're building bridges with rural Manitobans. I see that in some of their Twitter feeds, and this is a way to build the bridge from both sides, or a fence in the case of a farmer. I guess it doesn't have to be a bridge, but to move forward and allow farmers to contact their closest level of government for permission to remove this. It doesn't allow a farmer or anybody just to go out and start removing dams willy-nilly. They do have to go to the local level, and they need to get permission from the local government. The local government will then notify the appropriate department in a timely manner to what's going on with the removal of the beaver dam. So passage of this nonpartisan bill today will ensure members on both sides of the House can bring the voices of rural Manitobans forward for a positive change. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
A question period of up to 10 minutes will be held. Questions may be addressed to the sponsoring member by any member in the following sequence. First question to be asked by a member from another party. This is to be followed by a rotation between the parties. Each independent member may ask one question, and no question or answer shall exceed 45 seconds. The Honourable Member for Burrows.
I want to say thank you to member from Interlake Gimli to present this important Bill 210, which talks about moisture and drainage issues, which are very important for the farmers in Manitoba. I have a few questions. Can I ask, will consultations be held for before authorization is granted to a property owner? If yes, how will consultations be held? If yes, how will stakeholders be identified? If no, why not?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Yeah, if the member could clarify consultations of each dam or consultations of this bill. If it's consultations of this bill, consultations has been done through AMM. They've sent out the general discussion of this bill. It was last year, and the president at the time had no negative feedback on the bill, and I've also consulted with my local constituents and local municipalities, and not just in Interlake Gimli, but neighboring constituents as well.
The Honourable Member for Swan River.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member from Interlake Gimli for bringing this really important bill to the front, because in rural Manitoba, and especially along the fringes of the Duck Mountains and Porcupines, we definitely have lots of issues with this. And can the member please speak to how this bill will empower local communities and government while continuing to cut the red tape in our province?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That's a great question. Local municipalities, they know their watersheds, and they are the best ones to make decisions on their watersheds. They know if it's a problem area, and they know best how to address it. If a dam is removed and there's going to be water that's flowing, they will know all the downstream precautions that they need to take, and they know the route of the water. So it's empowering the local municipalities is what this bill is about.
The Honourable Member for Burrows.
I want to ask, will there be an environmental assessment or some means of analysis before a dam is destroyed?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Currently, there is no environmental assessment. It's not changing the legislation as it currently is, other than empowering the municipalities to make the decision. So there's no environmental assessment as of today.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Interlake Gimli for bringing this important bill forward. This has been an ongoing issue for many, many years. I know AMM and municipalities have been asking to have more control and authority over beaver dams and lodges, because they do cause a lot of anguish for farmers and for municipalities. So can the member please explain how this bill will make life easier for rural Manitobans to protect their property from water and wildlife damage?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a timing issue. Well, I guess we've all heard the saying, busy as a beaver, and beavers can lift the height of their dam up overnight substantially. So a problem that you don't notice for a period of time can all of a sudden have water encroaching on a farmer's field. So it's the timely response. Right now it is a long process to go through permitting, and the person who decides ultimately decides the permit doesn't even live in the community and know the local watershed. So this will make life easier by a timely response.
The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
I want to thank the member for bringing forward this bill. I'm just wondering who is responsible for the permitting and why is it so slow?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Currently, it's a conservation officer has to go out and locate the dam, and that often takes a time in itself. We've currently just hired 8 new conservation officers, but we would like them to focus on people that are poaching, breaking the law, and after the conservation officer looks at the dam, locates it, and gives the locations, then the permitting comes to either Selkirk or Winnipeg, and it's just a long bureaucratic process for it to go through.
The Honourable Member for Swan River.
Yeah, again, thank you to the member from Interlake Gimli. I actually recall a few times where some of the farmers in the agricultural area in our area have not been able to feed their cattle herds because of substantial flooding that occurs. So again, I really appreciate bringing this forward. Has the member received any feedback from Manitobans about delays with the current process for removal requests?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Thank you. Yeah, I have spoke with farmers where their permit has taken years to get done, and by the time this is drowning out their pastures, their hayland, their fences go underwater, and if it goes through a year of a freeze-thaw cycle where the fence posts are underneath water, the ice actually jacks the posts out of the water and starts destroying their fences. So there's a lot more to it than just water and drowning out crops. There's a lot of damage that happens, including drowning out large portions of our boreal forest.
The Honourable Member for Burrows.
The member spoke of local mayor Reeve being consulted. Were the First Nations leaders consulted?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Municipalities, they don't have jurisdiction over First Nations. Right now, First Nations, they do not have to apply for a permit to remove a beaver dam on their land. So the municipalities do not have jurisdiction over First Nations. Each municipality only has jurisdiction within their own municipality. They cannot give permission to remove a beaver dam outside their municipality, even in a neighboring municipality. They only have authority within their own watershed and municipality.
The Honourable Member for Dauphin.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And again, I'll say again, the AMM and the municipalities have been after this kind of authority for a long time. A lot of these projects are really small in nature. When you look at the environmental impact, you're talking about lodges and dams that are obstructing municipal infrastructure, backing up on farmers' land. So how is this bill an improvement on the current process for requesting the removal of beaver dams or instructions to water flow?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Well, it boils down to local knowledge and the knowledge that they have. The conservation officers, they're not in the municipalities every single day. They don't live there in most cases. So the local knowledge and reducing the timelines with the local knowledge. They know the local municipalities, reeves, councillors, they'll know whether it's safe to remove the beaver dam, and it'll speed things up and make it better for rural Manitobans.
The Honourable Member for Burrows.
What will the approved mechanism be for destroying a beaver dam? How will they be identified case by case? How was this decided? Were experts consulted?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Well, I've talked to conservation officers, and they're the ones that I've spoke with. They're excited to have this lifted off. But the local municipalities, they have water conservation districts as well, and they're very, very familiar with how the water flows and where the natural water should pool. There's no intention of changing that. The local experts know how the water flows, and the conservation districts will be involved as well, because councillors sit on the conservation districts as well. So that's the local expert level there.
The Honourable Member for Swan River.
Yeah, again, thank you. I know some farmers who've encountered some pretty substantial vet bills with the flooding in pastures and the cattle being in those damp conditions and with hoof rot and things of that nature. But more importantly, also in addition to that, how will this bill result in freeing up time for department staff to focus on other responsibilities under their mandate?
The Honourable Member for Interlake Gimli.
Yeah, I spoke of that a little bit already. The many extra miles that a conservation officer has to put on, that's time that he's in a vehicle driving around, not to mention traipsing across a quarter section somewhere to try and find the dam that's affecting the property. So just in time alone, not to mention the departmental time that it'll save from the creating the permits when it's done at a local level. So I just want to thank everybody for their great questions today, and on hopefully this nonpartisan bill can move forward and come to a vote today. Thank you very much.
The time for this question period has ended. Debate is open. The Honourable Member for Burrows.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Bill 210, the Wildlife Amendment Act, Protecting Property from Water and Wildlife Damage, amends the Wildlife Act. A municipality, local government, district, or incorporated community may authorize a person to destroy a beaver lodge or beaver dam, or to remove an obstruction to water flow caused by an accumulation of debris if it adversely affects local water flow or land use. Currently, a landowner has the right to kill or take certain wildlife in defense of their property. This bill extends the right to tenants of private or leased Crown land. While Bill 210 addresses an important issue, we have concerns because the bill does not outline thoughtfully or thoroughly the process behind authorizing the destruction of a beaver dam and the means to which it is carried out. Beaver dams are a real concern because they can affect waterways, but it is important that adequate consultations occur when we make major disruptions to wildlife. There are many stakeholders that need to be consulted when destroying a beaver dam, and this bill does not make it clear how this is supposed to happen. There can be neighboring communities potentially affected by changes to water levels that come from destructing a dam. Neighbors of a property owner who chooses to apply for an authorization may be implicated. With consultations also come notification. Will community members be notified when an application has been made by an individual to destroy a beaver dam? Or will community members be notified once the application has been granted? Will community members be able to appeal the application, or will they have to wait until individuals are authorized? And if authorization is granted, will an individual be able to make an appeal to the municipality? Or will an individual be able to appeal to Water Rights Board? Many questions arise from Bill 210 because it lacks specificity, and there are also real concerns regarding environmental impacts of beaver dams. Both the presence and destruction of dams can cause impacts to the natural environment they surround. Will some type of analysis or assessment need to be done prior to destruction of a beaver dam? And will implications to water levels need to be assessed? It is also unclear If liability issues have been considered in drafting of this bill, Bill 210, in the event that Beaver Dam is destroyed and there are unintended consequences, such as rising water levels in another municipality for a neighbor or impacts to a business's operations, who would assume liability, the municipality or the individual? This is very important factor that should be considered while proceeding in this direction. So these are things that need to be clearly laid out and detailed for Manitobans. Bill 210 also doesn't provide any detail in which means are used for destroying a dam. Many dams can be quite large, many can be difficult to access, and many can be in close proximity to other important wildlife and ecosystems. So we need to consider these factors. That's why the methods in which are permitted, such as backhoe or dynamite to destroy dams, be thoughtfully analyzed, considered, and clearly laid out. Methods of destruction can also be quite intrusive for this surround environment and wildlife. And experts should be consulted. I'm not sure if they were. And there have been consultations, then the bills should clearly indicate permitted methods. So this is why we believe that Bill 210 is too vague. Rather, it should have been specifically mentioned to clarify these questions and concerns. When we talk about Crown lands leasing, when we talk about this government and its policies, the government continues to make it difficult for Manitobans to keep their Crown land leases. Cattle producers lease Crown lands from provincial governments for pasture for their animals. Each province establishes its own process to grant these leases. These leases are often on very long terms, up to 50 years in length. As a result, they're highly desirable when they become available, often when a rancher retires. Manitoba currently has approximately 2,500 leases and permits with cattle producers, and there are currently approximately 7,000 cattle farmers in Manitoba. Until last year, Manitoba set rental rates by an assessment of comparable private rents and allocated them based on a scoring system where points were objectively awarded based on forage availability and land management practices, the size of livestock herd, the age of farmer, prioritizing access for young farmers, new leasee status, again prioritizing access for young farmers, proximity to parcel, ensuring farmers can move their animals between pastures, distance from headquarters, and non-farm income. This point-based system prioritized access for young ranchers, allowing families to add parcels to their existing operation. Contiguous access are important issues for ranchers. That is, unlike a combine, you can't move 200 head of cattle down the road very easily. So that's why these considerations are very important while leasing Crown lands, which is no more the case. The 2017 Throne Speech announced modernizing regulations for agricultural Crown lands, and Agriculture Minister on December 13th announced that leases will now be granted based on a new tendering system, which is unfortunate for many beef producers, as demonstrated by them opposing this. The minister claims that this new system had to be introduced because of trade arrangements. Yet our neighbor, Saskatchewan, who is engaged in the same trade arrangements, maintains the point-based system to award land leases. In September 2019, just after the election, the province launched changed regulations that decreased Crown land leases from a maximum of 50 years to just 15, and removed unit transfers except for those to direct family and cement allocations by auction. Northern ranchers argue that the regulations undermine long-term security for ranchers made up mostly of Crown lands. How can a producer or renter of a Crown land can invest hundreds of thousands of dollars on that land improvement, which he is not sure to maintain or have after 15 years, because they could be bid out by anyone, and there's no point investing so much in that land. So we care about the future for beef producers that ensures young people can continue to farm, and the new tendering process is hurting young farmers the most. And while this government keeps on saying that our auctions are successful and it has been won, the bidders, successful bidders were young farmers. I want to mention here that one of the farmers near Dauphin who won the bid was 76 years old. So I don't know how they define what a young farmer means. So 76 years farmer is a young farmer, then I feel like I'm just a baby, I'm just 45. So, and if we talk about the environment track record of this government, I don't...
The member's time has expired. Are there any further members speaking on debate? The Honourable Member for St. Boniface.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. We do have some concerns about this bill. There's a saying, if you find yourself screaming, it's because you don't have a plan. And there doesn't seem to be enough coordination or planning around this bill. We do recognize that drainage is one of the most important issues in Manitoba on a continual basis. If it weren't, we wouldn't be planning on building a $500 million flood outlet, nor would we be spending, nor would we have spent hundreds of millions over the many years in order to protect Winnipeg and other, and in fact the entire province to deal with flooding, which is a much larger issue than beavers and beaver dams alone. I do think we need to look at the fact that it is so slow to get a permit. That is entirely in the purview of this government to make a difference, whether they're issuing permits quickly or not for this to happen. That is people have said they've been waiting years to get a permit. This government has been in power for years, and that, it seems to me, is a signal failure on their part. It's also important to recognize that you can get rid of water, but it doesn't simply disappear. If someone breaks down a beaver dam or any other kind of flood control structure, that water, to get the water off their land, it has to go somewhere. Often the risk is it may go into someone else's land. The fact is, it's easy to solve your problems if you just dump them entirely on your neighbor, which is the entire philosophy of this government when it comes to austerity or anything else. When we look at the fact that this has been extended to Crown lands, it's also worth recalling exactly what's happened with ranchers in Crown lands. I traveled to the Interlake to talk with dozens of ranchers who've been horribly impacted by this government, and one of the issues that they face is precisely that their land has been harmed by flooding, and in some cases it was deliberate flooding engineered by previous governments in an effort to spare some producers or some communities by dumping those costs onto others, dumping the impact and pain onto others, but not actually compensating them for it. There's a saying, and there are risks along with this, so-called unintended consequences, and that's precisely that this is a scattershot approach. We are extremely concerned that, on the one hand, it's important to have local decision-making, to respect local expertise, but there's a saying that good fences make good neighbors, but water doesn't care about fence lines or property lines or the lines of municipalities. The water has to go somewhere, and it's no good if you're just avoiding flood on your own land and dumping it on somebody else. That is a major concern. As far as the concern about conservation, not inadequate conservation officers, a lack of resources for permitting, those are both 100% in the purview of this government to solve, which they're not doing. If it's a problem that conservation officers have to traipse across the landscape to find a dam that needs to be dismantled or reduced. If this government had actually supported the expansion of rural internet, and you could get a cell signal in parts of rural Manitoba, you could drop a pin on Google Maps and conservation officers wouldn't have to waste any time. This bill should have had consultation with First Nations. Municipalities may think they don't have a duty to consult, but this provincial government does. And the fact is that not only have First Nations been treated as disposable and deliberately flooded in the past, that is an ongoing issue right now. The Manitoba government sacrificed First Nations like Lake St. Martin to save others, and many people lost their homes or rendered homeless at enormous expense to themselves and others. And these floods were certainly not caused by Beavers alone. We do want to empower farmers. We want rural communities to thrive. And we need a plan to make sure that we're dealing with flooding in a way that actually makes sense. Now, as it happens, my family does have a quarter section near Rossburn. We've dealt with issues of flooding. We've dealt with issues of beaver dams. And there are times when people are accused, when because of problems with water management, it was suggested that we had a water control device that was flooding our neighbor's land, which was not the case. It was happening naturally. But the issue of drainage is incredibly important, and the issue of how the water flows needs to have a bigger picture and have larger oversight. So even if this bill goes ahead, even if we make it easier for people to remove these structures, it's incredibly important that it's being done within the context of a larger plan, so that people aren't just flooding their neighbors, so that farmers aren't just flooding their neighbors or passing the cost on to somebody else. But that also applies to rural municipalities and municipalities, that they're not just relieving the risk of flood on their own land and passing it on to another municipality, to a First Nation, or having other environmental which have other environmental, social, political, and economic risks. The fact is that this is an incredibly the issue of water, the issue of it is incredibly important because it actually makes the difference. As many of the members of the government side said, it makes a colossal difference to farmers' capacity to make a living. If their land is underwater, if their cropland is underwater, if they're unable to graze, this has been a massive impact, but it continues to be a massive impact. And again, I'll just return to a moment on the issue of Crown lands and cattle farmers who are ranching on Crown lands. That part of the reason why there hasn't been a recognition on the part of this government for the damage they're doing is that so many of those farmers are actually dealing with the impact of past floods that have rendered their land much more marginal. And what we need to do is have a plan to make sure that conservation districts are involved, and that there actually needs to be times when there needs to be something more than just people going out on their own and blowing up beaver dams, or people going out on their own and doing this on their own without fully thinking about what might be happening to their neighbor, because that is actually the role of municipal governments, but also of this government as well. We do, and excuse me. So that's the most important thing, is that we cannot have. We still need to have a framework that exists. And a process that needs to go through. If the process is too slow, again, that's on this government to address, to put the resources into permitting if it's that urgent and if it's that important, to make sure that these things are moving forward quickly. But this is, I understand, a problem that's existed not just under this government, but the previous government as well. We need to be able to deal with these things in a way that's prompt and expeditious, because this is also the sort of thing that can cause emergencies. But ultimately, there needs to be a broader plan put together, or if this bill is going to move forward, if this bill is going to be continued, that it needs to be set in a broader regulatory framework to make sure that when if a dam is to be destroyed, there may be times that it's a bad idea to do it, and that people need to be willing to say no when it does happen in order to prevent something worse from happening. The fact is that there are always going to be unintended consequences for many of these measures. And this is, on the one hand, this is being portrayed as empowerment, but really part of this is passing off costs and, frankly, risks to individuals that should really be borne by government. Is that ultimately what happens? The other question about this is actually, and I think that is a critical question, when it comes to liability. Part of the reason to have a plan, part of the reason to have a bigger picture, is to recognize that because of the economic impacts of flooding, if a farmer or an individual blows up a dam and floods his neighbor's land, we could actually end up having lawsuits, we could have liabilities, there could be tremendous damage and costs. So this is something that needs to be approached carefully, and I'm not sure that that's something this bill has addressed adequately. So in many ways, there are certainly basic principles here. We recognize that this is a problem, that damming in water is a problem. We recognize it needs to be dealt with in a way that's smart and effective, and hopefully as efficient and low cost as possible. We recognize that people at the local level have a great degree of expertise, but ultimately there's a point when if you're only focused on your own self-interest and the self-interest of your land or the self-interest of your municipality, and you don't take into consideration the impacts on your neighbors, there's going to be a problem. And that's what has to be considered in the broader context of this bill. Ultimately, look, we're all Manitobans, and the fact is that if all we're going to do is destroy a dam to relieve flooding on our part and flood somebody else instead, it's not going to work. So I thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I look forward to further debate on the bill.
The Honourable Member for Keewatin-Nook.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In regards to Bill 210, I've heard farmers, landowners, consultations, local reviews, mayors, councillors, but I have not heard First Nation leadership in regards to consultation process with this bill. And I understand it's been introduced as a potential nonpartisan issue, but at the same time, how can it be declared a nonpartisan issue when you won't involve all parties? Not just parties in this chamber, not just parties within rural Manitoba, but parties all over Manitoba. And that's a big issue that we have with our First Nation communities when it comes time to dealing with things like this. While we understand Bill 210 addresses an important issue, we have concerns because of the process behind this and exactly what happened. There are many stakeholders that need to be consulted when destroying a beaver dam, and this bill does not make it clear when that is supposed to happen. There can be neighboring communities and First Nations potentially affected by changes to water levels that come from the destruction of a dam. Neighbors of a property owner who choose to apply for an authorization may be implicated. With consultation also comes notification. So will people be notified after the fact, after an application has been made, after approval has been made, and what kind of dispute resolution do they have to be able to say, this is going to affect me, and exactly what does that process entail? I think about my own First Nation and exactly the gray area that something like this does create. For our water supply that we had in our community, it comes down the Winnipegao River. And at one point in time, that river got dammed by cottagers upriver just simply because their water level was too low. So in order to increase their water level to a certain height, they actually eliminated ours with no consultation, no discussion. And again, because it didn't cross into First Nation reserve land, reserve boundary, they felt they didn't have to consult or didn't have to talk to anybody. So those kind of things have implications over jurisdictional boundaries. And we're not saying that there should be a veto power over anything like this. It's all about consulting and being able to talk with everybody that's involved, all the stakeholders and all the potential stakeholders that may be affected. It may be just simply as a matter of forming a committee, forming a board that actually does oversee this. And for the most part, maybe a lot of these issues are rubber stamped. But it needs to involve everybody at that table and involve people and all the stakeholders that are involved over all jurisdictional boundaries that may be affected by something in the area. When we have no jurisdiction and we talk about jurisdictional issues provincially, federally, on reserve, off reserve, municipalities, I think it's something that we can all work together on, and it's something that we need to be able to work together on. And if we want to declare this a real nonpartisan issue, then let's truly make it that way and involve all parties and have all parties discuss what matters go. And if we have Bill 210 go forward, what kind of parameters are there? Again, there's still so many unknowns in this bill. There's so many gray areas. Again, it comes back to some of the other bills that we discussed over time, where we're going to do this, we're going to put thing in policy, trust us to do the right thing later on. So what kind of parameters are going to be involved? And those are the kind of questions that we're asking today. We're asking exactly what's going to happen today. What does this mean today? Is there a dispute resolution? There's a lot of unanswered questions in this supposed nonpartisan issue. So instead, when we spoke and the questions were being asked, it was only referred to as having no jurisdiction on First Nation territory. Have efforts even been made to work together? Or is it just simply no jurisdiction, and that's kind of the cop-out answer to say we don't want to work together? There are matters of jurisdiction, definitely, but there are also matters of attempting to work together over jurisdictional boundaries for the betterment of all involved. And I don't see that happening in this case. I don't think that's happened in many cases in regards to First Nation territory and First Nation issues and jurisdictional boundaries. But it's not something that nobody's open to. Nobody shut the door on that. But it seems to be a cop-out to just not work together. So while we recognize the needs of and the rights of First Nation communities and First Nation members to hunt, this is also an issue of water and wildlife damage is what we're talking about here. So when we talk about the water and exactly where the water flows in all of Manitoba, we talk about the experts or the so-called experts. So I asked the question then, who was consulted and who was part of developing this bill and developing the wording to be able to say this is what we do, this is what's right, I'm the expert. It was mentioned earlier about the municipalities and the reeves, they are the stewards of the lands. Well, First Nation people are the original stewards of the lands, but again, not consulted on this, and I would beg to differ, and I would have that strong argument that they're in fact the experts when it comes to dealing with things like this. So when we talk about going forward and working together, bills like this, bills that are spoken about as nonpartisan issues, then let's truly make that a nonpartisan issue. Let's bring all the stakeholders involved, both parties on both sides of this chamber, but also all of Manitobans. Not just farmers, not just rural Manitoba, but all people that are affected in this. I understand there's real consequences for things that may happen in regards to damage from wildlife, damage from water. But again, let's involve all. And that's something that is clearly not happening here and doesn't happen on a number of issues. And that's the awareness that I really want to raise, is being able to involve everybody in this process on a truly nonpartisan issue over jurisdictional boundaries, because we are all living on this one Mother Earth. So let's involve everybody in this process and let's be able to work together. Let's not fight over jurisdictional areas. Let's not fight over, well, we can hunt up to this point. We can hunt up to this boundary line, up to this reserve line. Let's not do that. Let's work together. Where I come from, we have a lot of beaver population in our area. It affects the water system. It affects the roadways. It affects it in all kinds of different ways. We describe sometimes as maybe nuisance beavers we talk about, and what does that mean? But at the end of the day, they are a part of our civilization, and that is exactly what we need to discuss too. We need to discuss exactly: is this a free-for-all? Is this a free-for-all for somebody to go out and say, "I determine this to be a nuisance, so I'm going to do this"? Exactly what kind of dispute mechanism is there? And what kind of approval system is there? And who's involved in that approval system? Is it a matter of, well, I have some friends that are connected in various organizations, so I have the right to go out and hunt? Again, where's the safety issue in this? How is this going about? How is this going to be brought about? How is this going to be instituted? We don't know that. Again, a lot of unknowns and way too many unknowns in this situation. And again, we're not talking about somebody who's going to go out there and just grab something out of the water. They perhaps are carrying a weapon. Are they using guns? Are they going to use dynamite? Are they going to use whatever means necessary? And who determines exactly what that is by any means necessary to be able to do that? And those are simply the questions we're asking. We're asking very simple questions, and we're not getting simple answers. And to me, that should be an easy back and forth. Again, on this supposed nonpartisan issue. And I mean, I've heard that term, and I heard it mentioned a couple times, nonpartisan, nonpartisan, nonpartisan. Let's truly make it that way, involve everybody. But again, this government has proven time and time again that they're not willing to do that. They're not willing to involve all the stakeholders. They're not willing to be able to sit down and just have a conversation, hear the input. They play fast and loose with the word consultation. There's consultation versus consent versus engagement, and I've heard all those words time and time again. They're all interchanged. But at the same time, let's sit there and have a truly meaningful dialogue to be able to deal with things just like Bill 210. It's good? Sorry. And be able to engage everybody and all the stakeholders that are involved. You know, whether they're First Nation, whether they're Reeves, whether they're mayors or councils, whether they're anybody involved in this process. Because it is an issue for today. It is an issue that's now setting policy, now setting bills, now setting legislation that's going to affect going forward. And exactly what does that mean going forward? People think that we can just destroy a beaver or a beaver house with no consequence. But what does that mean for us? What does that mean for our ecosystem? There's a lot of things that we don't understand in what goes on. A lot of things happen for a reason. We talk about the marshlands, and what does that mean? Well, you know, my marshland is flooding, so now I'm going to kill this beaver house, I'm going to destroy this beaver house, I'm going to free that up. So now those marshlands are in fact the dialysis, and they are the kidneys of our system, and exactly what we need to survive to clean our water. So who's going to determine that? It's going to be determined by somebody with a gun who feels, you know what, this is improper for me to do. So with that, thank you, Madam Speaker.
The Honourable Member for St. John's.
Miigwech, Madam Speaker. I'm pleased to put a couple of words on the record in respect to Bill 10. I thought that since we are discussing beavers and their habitats, and I mean, some of it has been talking about beavers only in a context of the destruction that they do. I thought it was important if we put a couple of facts and information on the record about beavers, Madam Speaker, since we're talking about beavers. So,
order, please. Before the member goes too far down that road, I would indicate that relevance to this bill needs to be ensured, so that if the member is going to be talking about beavers, as she's indicating, that it be relevant to the bill and what this bill is intended for. The Honourable Member for St. John's.
well, Madam Speaker, I believe it is relevant to talk about some of the characteristics of beaver when we're talking about the habitats of beavers and the potential to have landowners expedite the right to kill beavers in their natural territories and their natural environments. So I think it's important to understand some of the characteristics of beavers. And so I did, like I said, want to put some facts on the record. I mean, this bill is specifically, and the member for, where? Gimli. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Did mention primarily in this bill only about beavers and beaver dams and the destruction that and the heartache that they create for landowners. And so I haven't heard anything else about any other animals, and so I think it's important to put some of those on the official record as we are debating this. And so, Madam Speaker, I learned some interesting facts this morning about beavers that I thought that we would all be interested in knowing. And so the basic units of beaver social organization, Madam Speaker, are families consisting of an adult male, an adult female in a monogamous pair with their kits and their yearlings, Madam Speaker. Beaver families can have as many as 10 members in addition to the monogamous pair. I think this is quite fascinating. Groups this size or close to this side build more lodges, Madam Speaker, to live in, while smaller families usually need only one. So I think that when we're talking about this bill and we look at some of the different dams and social organizations that landowners are coming into contact with, it's important to have this information in respect of how these dams or these family units are actually constructed by beavers. So large families in the Northern Hemisphere have been recorded living in one lodge, Madam Speaker. Beavers, like I said, they mate for life. However, Madam Speaker, if a beaver mate dies, the remaining beaver can partner with another one. And then I thought that this was quite fascinating, Madam Speaker. Actually, both male and female beavers take part equally in raising their offsprings. They also mark their territory and defend their territory, and build and repair the dams and lodges. So I think it's fascinating, Madam Speaker, and I'm sure that most in the House would agree that actually beavers are one of the few animals in the world that actually build their environment. So often when we talk about animals, they are a part of the environment, obviously, but beavers actually also construct their little biosphere, their little environment to protect their social organization and to allow them to survive and to thrive in North America and in these territories. Miigwech. So when the young are born, Madam Speaker, they spend their first month in the lodge, and their mother is the primary caregiver, while the father, the male beaver, actually protects the territory. And by the time they leave the lodge for the first time, babies or yearlings will help their parents build food caches in the fall and repair dams and lodges. So you can see, Madam Speaker, when we're talking about Bill 10 and we're talking about these lodges, actually it is the whole family beaver unit that contribute to ensuring that the dam and their home and their environment is actually protected. I think that that's quite important to put on the record here, that it is not just it's not just the male beavers, but it's actually the whole family unit that contribute to the construction and upkeep of their environment. Still, the adults do the majority of the work. I thought that this was quite interesting. Where did I see this? Young beavers, Madam Speaker, actually spend most of their time playing, which I thought was interesting. They do also copy their parents' behavior. That's where they learn their behaviors. They mimic those behaviors, and they imprint those life skills from their parent beavers, which allows this beaver behavior to continue in respect of creating your own environment and safeguarding your family. It's older offspring, Madam Speaker, and we're talking about maybe at two years of age for beaver, may also live in families and will help their parents, Madam Speaker. They've also been known, older sibling beavers have been known to actually also help in the care of younger beavers. So they'll take on those roles.
Order,
please.
Parents. When this matters again before the House, the honourable member will have 3 minutes remaining. The hour is now 11 a.m. and time for private members' resolutions. The resolution before us this morning is the resolution on $2,020 tax rollback guarantee brought forward by the honourable member for Portage-La Prairie. And before I recognize the honourable member for Portage-La Prairie, I'd like to introduce some guests to you that have just arrived in the gallery. We have seated in the public gallery from Linden Christian School 69 grade 4 students under the direction of Karen Schrader, and this group is located in the constituency of the Honourable First Minister. On behalf of all members here, we welcome all of you to the Manitoba Legislative Building. I will now recognize the honourable member for Portage-La Prairie to introduce his resolution.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move, seconded by the member for Turtle Mountain. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba be urged to fight for Manitobans to have the right to retain their money and to sustain low taxes throughout the 2020 tax rollback guarantee.
It has been moved by the Honourable Member for Portage-La Prairie, seconded by the Honourable Member for Turtle Mountain. Therefore, be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly of Manitoba be urged to fight for Manitobans to have the right to retain their money and to sustain low taxes through the 2020 tax rollback guarantee. The Honourable Member for Portage-La Prairie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and it's a pleasure to rise and talk about this particular issue. It's important to all Manitobans that they are able to retain as much of their hard-earned income as possible and to put it to uses that are of their choice and strengthen their own community through their actions in their own community. And this is all about building community and building families. And it's never easy for government to put in place policies that help build communities and strengthen families. But we're trying very hard to do that as a government, particularly after a decade or more that has led to a lot of decline in income stabilization and incomes suffering badly, mostly through income taxes of various types being rained upon them by provincial governments. I know that during that period of time, when there was an NDP government in Manitoba, we had 15 tax increases in 14 years. And that type of increase is not sustainable. One of the reasons that I, as an individual, got into politics was because we could see that the route that was being followed was definitely not sustainable moving forward, and it was a motivator in particular on the education tax issue in rural areas that is a real burden to many rural people, the farm community, the rural community in general. It's something that needs to be changed and fixed, and there was certainly no sign that that was going to happen under the previous government. The implementation of the 2020 tax rollback in Manitoba will save Manitobans an average of $2,020 over the next 4 years. And of course, this is the time of year when everybody's getting ready or has, in a few cases, I think, already filed their income tax. And so people are very aware, in particular, that this is a major saving. We've done a couple things in the area of personal deductions. We have indexed it so that the creeping progress that was made, the erosion that was made by not having it indexed and reducing the value of your personal deduction now has stopped, and that alone is worth about $30 million across Manitoba. So that's certainly a move in the right direction. And then the increase in personal deductions will put a lot of money back on Manitoba tables. Over the next 4 years, there's approximately 880,000 taxpayers in Manitoba. That'll put about $1.8 billion back on kitchen tables. And that's a significant shot in the arm, and I think we're all very aware that about 40% of Manitobans at the end of the month only have about $200 left to their name. We're helping to improve that situation very dramatically by not taking the money from them in taxes in one form or the other. So Manitobans also are very sensitive to the issue of PST. I remember the campaign where the NDP premier at the time made the promise that PST would not be increased. And then, of course, as we all know, without taking the referendum, the increase to people in the referendum, that in fact it was increased. And that was a real blow, made us as a province less competitive with our neighbors, so it was certainly a burden in regards to that. And that type of blow tends to erode everyone's income or the impact of the dollars that they spend in the community. It's particularly burdensome to the working poor, people with limited and fixed incomes, when you raise a consumptive tax like PST. So I'm very proud to be part of a government that has already lowered the PST 1% as our promise, and is now looking at moving even further and lowering the PST another %. During the time that there was NDP and government, the cumulative total of their taxes, of 15 taxes over 14 years, was about like raising the PST another %. So they certainly eroded the spending power of people an awful lot. The NDP also expanded the base on which they had PST calculated, things like haircuts, but other goods and services that are important. In particular, at this time of year, the PST would have applied to accountants' fees and legal fees. If you use either of those things in terms of business planning or planning for your future or planning your estates, and of course the issue of estate taxes is another one. So during their NDP tenure, a lot of money went off kitchen tables and into their coffers. And we certainly want to be sure that we can maintain the services that Manitobans need while putting more money back on kitchen tables. The PST reduction that I referenced earlier reduced, that put a lot of extra money back in Manitobans' hand. The 1% reduction that was in July of 2019 is worth around $300 million to Manitobans. And when we move forward on the $25 per ton green levy, that'll further reduce the PST to 6%. That'll be another $300 million that Manitobans will have on their own kitchen tables. And there's lots of evidence to support that the $25 ton green levy will have an impact in itself in changing people's habit in terms of consumption. Everybody's watching gas prices these days, of course, because they've been volatile in their own right, and of course now with some of the impact on in the oil industry, they're doubly volatile for the next little while. And we're very much aware that it has an impact, but for those of us that live in rural and remote areas, we don't really have a lot of choices when it comes to whether or not we burn gas to go and do an errand or do what we need to do. It's simply not a choice that we have to make. And of course, there is no other option in terms of using public transport or anything like that. We certainly have all got to the point now where we plan our trips very carefully and don't make anything extra in terms of trips to try and keep our consumption down. I think many people in rural communities are far more aware of environmental issues than they're given credit for, and certainly have come to understand so that what we do on the environment has a major impact beyond the farm gate or beyond the rural community, and that it's part of the whole issue of global warming, and are very aware of it and are doing a lot of activities to reduce the impact. During the 2020 tax rollback guarantee, we'll also remove the PST. We will also be removing the PST from home insurance, personal services, and fees for wills and tax return. Removing PST on home insurance is a major move in the right direction. It's very important to get Manitobans to protect themselves against events beyond their control, and insurance is a major part of that. And it's something that I think most Manitobans are very aware of. It's interesting to look at it this year in particular because, of course, we're worried about flood. And this is the first year that there actually is flood insurance available in Manitoba, private flood insurance for some parts of the province. And that has not been the case in the past. And so it's changing a few things quite a bit, and people are having a look at it. And of course, across the line in North Dakota, they're also in a situation very similar where now flood insurance is available down in that jurisdiction on a private basis. But of course, they too there are regions of the state down there that are not eligible for that. And it's generated quite a lot of discussion, actually, if you follow North Dakota papers at all, running up to the flood, that some people can get insurance for it and some people can't. And why the boundaries are where they are, which is based very much on whether or not appropriate government has taken appropriate steps to protect them. Now, I know I'm running out of time here, and I know there are many people that want to talk about the tax situation in Manitoba, but I did want to touch in particular on education tax. It's one of the reasons that I got involved in politics, because the formula that's been followed for many, many years on education tax is actually based on the Homestead Act. The Homestead Act of 1893 is the reason we have education tax on property. Now, that's a long time ago. We clearly have many reasons to look at how we have been funding education, because we all want good education for our family members in Manitoba, but we need to find a sustainable way to fund it. And our government has made a promise during the last election to move forward with moving education tax off property. That's a major shift, and something we're planning on doing over 10 years. So thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
The honourable member's time is up. A question period up to 10 minutes will be held, and questions may be addressed in the following sequence. The first question be asked by a member of another party. Any subsequent question must follow a rotation between parties. Each independent member may ask one question. No questions or answers shall exceed 45 seconds. The honourable member for Fort Garry.
Thank you. Is the government concerned that high-income earners will disproportionately benefit from these tax cuts?
The honourable member for Portage-La Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And actually, if you look at how the personal income benefit is calculated and how you get your return on the tax return, it's actually low-income earners that proportionately do better than high-income earners. On the basic personal exemption, it's the same for everyone. So it's a higher percentage of your income when you're low income than it is for the larger income people. So proportionately, they do better.
The honourable member for Lagimodiere.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'd just like to ask the member why he believes that Manitobans deserve tax relief.
The honourable member for Portage-La Prairie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Certainly, we mentioned in my few remarks that Manitobans have, many Manitobans have very little personal disposable income left at the end of the month. The more we can put back on the individual's kitchen table for their discretion and to spend in their own community to strengthen their family and their community, the better I think they will be, and I think the whole community and then the province will be. So it's sort of strengthening the community or strengthening Manitoba from the grassroots up.
The honourable member for Fort Garry.
The member opposite raised the basic personal exemption. Now, when we look at the lowest tax bracket, the average taxpayer is going to save about $53 from these changes. But those making more than $70,000 a year are going to save more than $250 a year. So I'm going to ask this member, does the government believe that that is fair?
The honourable member for Portage-La Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We certainly believe that everyone needs to have more money put back on their kitchen table. If it's a question of income, those that are at low and fixed incomes, limited and fixed incomes, certainly need the benefit of an increased personal deduction. They get to keep more money as well. They're also the part of the community that is most impacted by changes to the PST. So lowering the PST has a proportionately better outcome to them because, of course, their spending habits. You spend a bigger portion of their income on consumables in particular. So we look at all sectors of society, and we certainly...
The honourable member's time is up. The honourable member for Southdale.
Deputy Speaker, can the member please tell us how much our 2020 tax rollback guarantee will save Manitoba families?
The honourable member for Portage-La Prairie.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the member for the question. And of course, the 2020 tax rollback is aptly named. Over 4 years, you're going to get about $20,020 in terms of savings. So it comes to around $505 per year. Significant saving to each individual across the province, and also very strong benefit to the family.
The honourable member for Fort Garry.
Does this government support a progressive taxation system? One where the more you benefit from the economy and the higher your income, the more you pay into the system.
The honourable member for Portage-La Prairie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know the member wants to be sure that every Manitoban pays their fair share in terms of the tax burden that the province requires to support the services that they provide across Manitoba. So we certainly do support a fair tax system that makes sure everyone contributes to their fair share to what the taxation is that is needed to support Manitoba. So I think that that's the best way to look at that. You cannot just take a simple analysis to a very complicated tax formula that applies not only here in Manitoba but across the country. I know the member is probably very familiar with the tax.
The honourable member's time is up. The honourable member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Could the member tell me, since we're running a deficit right now, and we're having to borrow to pay for every dime of this tax cut, how much is this going to add to Manitoba's deficit, and how much longer we will, this is postponing our actually balancing the budget?
The honourable member for Portage Prairie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I thank the member for the question because certainly he's been associated with a federal government that likes to spend deficit spends in a major way in this country, and we have provincially reduced the deficit as he knows, and we're getting to a point where somewhere in the next year or two we're going to balance the budget, which is a great step forward. There is some spending incentive. When money is spent in you have deficit spending, it creates a little economic stimulus in the community. The question is, when do you overdo it as a government? And of course, we're watching with great interest.
The honourable member's time is up. The honourable member for Fort Garry.
Why shouldn't businesses who fail to pay their taxes on time pay a fair interest rate for withholding tax dollars from the Manitoban people?
The honourable member for Portage Prairie.
Well, certainly we want to see Manitoba businesses pay their taxes, and though we are reducing the amount of interest that they are charged, they are still paying an interest rate that would probably in most cases be higher than bank interest rates if they were to go to private lending. So they are being penalized, as the member says, but we do want them to pay it back. And that's certainly why we're looking at structuring in a way that encourages them to pay back in a prompt manner.
The honourable member for McPhillips.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Can the member for Portage La Prairie mentioned that during the dark days of the NDP's tenure that they had raised taxes a multitude of times. Does the member know why the NDP think that Manitobans don't deserve their own money?
The honourable member for Portage La Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I certainly appreciate the question from the member for McPhillips. I can't actually look into the minds of the members opposite and understand why they believe what they believe in some circumstances, but it was very obvious, I know watching a number of budgets come forward under the NDP, you knew that there was going to be hidden taxes in there. They seemed to believe that their money was better, or that private individual money was better in their hands and that they would spend more wisely than a private individual would do. I think there's little evidence to support that. The other thing you knew for certain is that they would not hit the budget anyway.
The honourable member for Fort Garry.
We're hearing on a daily basis that the world is entering into a pandemic, and Manitoba will not be excluded from that. At a time when we may have a crisis in our healthcare system and we need more resources to battle this pandemic, is it a good idea to be cutting taxes at this moment?
The honourable member for Portage La Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I can assure the member that we are prepared for any health crisis that comes into Manitoba. We are taking steps. I know I spoke with the health minister the other day, and there special steps are being taken to be prepared for anything that might hit Manitoba. We cannot foresee the future with great certainty. I know that H1N1 and a few other examples that we have seen here in Manitoba in the past have been opportunities to learn how to be better prepared, and we're very serious about being well prepared. So money would be available and within the budget that we have now, and we will certainly do our best to make sure that anything that is necessary.
The honourable member's time is up. The honourable member for Fort Garry.
I'm wondering if the minister can, I'm wondering if the member can give an estimate to this House of how much is going to be borrowed and how much the interest costs will be on that borrowed money to cover the budget shortfall from these tax cuts.
The honourable member for Portage-La Prairie. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I would remind the member opposite that we actually have refilled the rainy day fund. We actually have something in place in case we do have a crisis. We did not deplete the rainy day fund like previous government did, to the point where they were vulnerable to any sudden impact or any sudden change. Right. We certainly hope and will take all steps necessary to make sure that there isn't any form of epidemic and that the impact is minimized here in Manitoba. But should there be any special need, we do have a rainy day fund to draw on. And I thank the member very much for that question.
The honourable member for Lagimodiere.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'd like to ask the member from Portage-La Prairie why he believes, or why tax relief for Manitobans is important to the people of this province and also to this side of the House.
The honourable member for Portage-La Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I thank the member for the question. Tax relief leaves the money in the individual's hands to benefit their family and their local community. As I said earlier, we believe on this side of the House the community is the strong basis that we want to build Manitoba from, that sets the right standard, and to strengthen the community makes all of Manitoba stronger. It's the right way to approach building a great Manitoba in the future.
Time for a question period has expired. The debate is open. Any speakers? The honourable member for Fort Garry.
Thank you. The average Manitobans are not going to save what this government is claiming they're going to save. And this is, unfortunately, since I've been here, more of the same, more of that sort of creative accounting, cooking the books, moving money here and there. And we see that pattern. And they call this the 2020 tax rollback. That is a misnomer. What this bill is the reverse Robin Hood tax. This is where the purpose of these tax cuts are having working class and middle class Manitobans hand over their money, which will flow up the food chain to high income Manitobans who are doing just fine in this economy and don't need this assistance at all. That's who will benefit from the nearly $1.8 billion in lost revenue from these very reckless cuts. And let's look at them. We have PST on home insurance. The government hasn't said exactly how much it's going to cost the Treasury, but we know it'll be in the tens of millions of dollars. They're saying it's an average insurance policy will be $70. But what's going to happen, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is that the insurance industry is just simply going to absorb that, and they're going to raise their rates by $70 a policy. And this is, again, more corporate welfare to the insurance industry. And again, are we surprised of that? No.
Order.
Then we're looking at personal services. So if you spend more money at the salon than $50 or your haircuts are more than $50, you're going to get a PST break. That's a $7 million hit to the Treasury. Well, who has more than $50 to spend at a salon or at a hair place? Well, wealthy Manitobans do, the people that aren't even asking for this tax break. So they're going to disproportionately benefit from this gift. Then we have PST off professional income tax preparation. Again, you need to have money to hire an accountant to do your taxes. That's $3 million in lost Treasury money. This isn't going to help you at your H&R Block type accounting services. This is going to be a gift to large companies and wealthy Manitobans. Then we have the phase out of the education property tax, over $800 million. And of course, the larger, wealthier house you have, the more property tax you have, the more you'll save from this. Again, it disproportionately benefits those that least need it. And then we have the PST reduction from last year, that was $325 million. And then we have a new PST reduction this year of $325 million. And then, of course, the index to basic personal exemption and the indexing of the personal income tax brackets. One of the estimates is in the first year alone, it's $75 million loss from those two measures. In 2020, another $34 million will be lost to the Treasury. And again, in my question, I mean, the data is pretty clear. If you are a low-income earner in Manitoba, you will save $50 from this measure. If you are in the top bracket, you are going to save $250 plus. There is absolutely nothing progressive about this. The PST changes, the indexing of the basic personal exemption, and the indexing of personal income brackets all make a progressive tax system less progressive. And it creates loopholes in which wealthy Manitobans can drive a Mack truck through and benefit from this tax regime. It does the absolute opposite of the Orwellian language that my friend opposite uses, saying that somehow the working Manitobans should be happy to have their pockets picked and hand over to their bosses part of their paycheck, because that's what all these cumulative effects of these taxes will do. So we also have the next thing is PST will be exempt on the preparation of wills. Well, that's legal fees. Well, again, you need money to hire a lawyer. Most Manitobans don't have wills because they don't have anything that's going to get passed down to anybody. You need to have wealth to pass it down. And if you have wealth to pass it down, you also have the money to hire a lawyer, and you don't need a coupon for your legal services. We're going to lose $1 million from that as well. And then probate fees. This is fantastic. $10 million lost in probate fees. We do not have an inheritance tax in Manitoba. We have no way to address wealth inequality in Manitoba. An inherited tax, a probate tax, all those things are measures to make us more of an equal and fair society. When you get rid of a probate fee, and for those who don't know, that means that basically you register with the courts and a judge reviews the estate and the will and charges a percentage based on the wealth of the estate in order to ensure that it is fair and it's proper and that nobody is getting cheated and that everything's above board. That's a service that our province provides people to keep things on the straight and narrow, and it allows for some redistribution of wealth because it's based on the size of your estate. So this is a direct attack on wealth equality in Manitoba. This will make us less fair. This will make us less equal as a province, and there's absolutely no justification. You don't see the good people of Manitoba rising up and saying, you know, I want more money being inherited to me that I didn't earn, and you need to bring that to me. That's just, nobody's asking for this. Nobody's asking for many of these measures. And then what's deeply troubling is this government is eliminating the interest on debts owed to Manitoba Finance for unpaid provincial taxes. And that will be in the multi-millions. So a business says they're not going to remit their retail sales tax. They're not going to remit a number of other taxes that they're required to remit. Well, you charge interest on it. When you don't pay your income tax or your corporate tax, the federal government charges interest on it because you're withholding money that's no longer yours. It's the people's money, and you have to pay for renting out that people's money. But apparently, not this government. When a business in Manitoba doesn't pay their fair share and withholds their fair taxation, we want to reward them and give them an incentive to do that. That is bananas. That is like opposite world. And there has been no justification from this government other than its corporate welfare as to why they would do this. So we have a loss of $1.8 billion in revenue here. And so tell me again why we can't spend $30 million to feed every single hungry child in Manitoba. That's unconscionable. $14 million to keep an ER open every year. Why did we have to shut any of them? We got money to spare, apparently. Why are we underfunding our education system? Why have we dismantled our healthcare system? We have the money here. Our childcare system is on the verge of collapse. And we're running around here saying, we don't think that wealthy people in Manitoba are wealthy enough, so let's give them a break. Because that's what this rollback does. So these are eye-popping numbers. And what's going to happen here is the tax burden is further going to get shifted from wealthy people and businesses to working people in the middle class. And we are getting less and less fair because of it. So PST cuts, they hurt poor and middle class people. They don't have the money to spend. So people who have more money, spend more money, save more money. But the reverse is true. When you pull out $108 billion from the budget, it means you got to find that money elsewhere. And you're doing it by cutting our education system, our healthcare system, our childcare system. You're not maintaining our roads and our schools. And those are the things that working families and Manitobans need and rely upon. They disproportionately use these services that you're now going to say, well, the cupboard's bare, we got to cut. How on earth, in a time that you claim that we're in a deficit, that you're further cutting taxes? Isn't that the height of fiscal irresponsibility? Wouldn't this make sense to pay off the deficit, to fill up all our rainy day funds, and then say, oh, okay, let's repair our education system that's underfunded. Let's repair the healthcare system, which is underfunded. Let's start rebuilding our roads. At the Winnipeg School Division, the infrastructure deficit alone for that one division is
Order. Please be seated. I just want to remind everyone, I can't hear the speakers, so if everybody can keep their conversation down and respect the person who's speaking and less heckling. The honourable member for Fort Garry.
So, under this government, in the last 3.5 years, poverty is now back on the rise. Income inequality is now getting worse in Manitoba. We're also seeing that the poor are getting less healthy and sicker, which are causing bigger strains on our system. This is disastrous. This has not been well thought out. This government needs to rethink this. Thank you.
The honourable member for Lagimodiere.
Well, thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I do appreciate the opportunity to rise and put a few words on the record with respect to this resolution. I do want to thank the member from Portage Prairie for putting this resolution forward, and I also want to thank him for all his good work he's done on the K-12 education review. We do look forward to the results of that coming forward. Now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the House here this morning, we've heard the opposite, the NDP opposite, talk about how concerned they are for the Treasury, and which is funny because while they were in power for 17 years, they had no concern for the Treasury, Mr. Deputy Speaker. They raised taxes and managed to raise the deficit at the same time, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I guess that's a skill only the members opposite could acquire. Mr. Deputy Speaker, just this past week, we lowered the PST further. So July 1st, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the PST will go from 7% down to 6%, saving Manitobans more money. Mr. Deputy Speaker, we've heard members opposite talk about the Treasury, and again, with feigned indignation, stands up here and has the audacity to say that it's taking money out of the system and taking money out of the Treasury to give back to Manitobans. Well, it's Manitobans' money in the first place, Mr. Deputy Speaker, so I don't know what their concerns are in this respect. Mr. Deputy Speaker, just this... Well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we have a track record of lowering taxes over the past few years, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Under our 2020 rollback, we'll remove the PST from home insurance. We're going to remove PST from personal care services such as haircuts, saving Manitobans roughly $7 million. Eliminate the PST on will preparation, saving Manitobans $1 million per year. Eliminate the probate fee as of July 1st of 2020. In fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, over the next 4 years, Manitoba's 880,000 taxpayers will save $1.8 billion. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I think it's important to recognize that Manitobans work very hard for their money. They get up early in the morning, they take care of their families, and they spend their time trying to improve not only their family, but their community. And putting money back in their pockets not only is good for the economy, it also incentivizes hard work and savings, Mr. Deputy Speaker. So I do encourage members opposite to get on board with this and support this resolution. It's a great resolution. We know that the member from Portage Prairie has worked hard on the resolution, and he's done quite a bit, not only in his house, but I know he's done a lot of work in his own community, so we do thank him for that. And I know his constituents are very lucky to have him represent them in this great Manitoba Legislative Assembly. Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know, the average Manitoban has some $200 of disposable income at the end of the day. And that is not a lot of money, as we all know. If any unsuspecting repairs have to come along, that could put in peril, put them in a financial hardship, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Putting any extra money back in their pockets is not only the right thing to do, we think it's also economically beneficial, so people can then have the money to spend, and spend as they so choose. We believe that, we do believe in choice here, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that Manitobans should choose how their hard-earned money is spent, and keep the money on the kitchen table, not the cabinet table. We know that the previous government, under Greg Selinger, he managed to raise taxes and increase the deficit. The deficit was approaching $1 billion a year. We had debt servicing fees of approaching $1 billion a year. Mr. Deputy Speaker, that was not sustainable financially, and it would be unfair to future generations to leave that kind of debt burden to them. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are on track to balance the budget. We've made major strides in reducing the deficit and lowering taxes, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We understand how to manage money on this side of the House. Members opposite obviously do not. They had 17 years to prove that very fact. It's a very poor resume for them on financial management. That's why Manitobans soundly rejected them in 2016 and voted for a huge majority progressive conservative government. In 2019, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we witnessed a record back-to-back majority government for us. And I believe it's also historic in the sense that it's the largest two back-to-back majorities ever in the province of Manitoba. The people have spoken, Mr. Deputy Speaker. We believe in democracy, and democracy is about giving the people a voice and a choice. And we believe that the voice, they selected the Progressive Conservative Party to govern this province, and choice, they get to choose how to spend their money, their hard-earned money, on items and programs that they would like to see spent on. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I won't belabor the point any further. I do again want to thank my colleague for bringing this resolution forward. I do encourage all members opposite to get on board with this and support this resolution and support our government in all our efforts to reduce the tax burden on hard-working Manitoba families. Thank you.
The honourable member for St. James.
About the future of the economy. This is probably not a great time to be slashing government revenues when we're staring down the barrel of potentially huge and significant economic disruptions. And so the member from Portage la Prairie referred a lot to their focus on helping Manitobans put more on the kitchen table. We're just not sure which kitchen table they're referring to. Looking here at, just for a second at some of the decisions that this government's made in education, in housing, in health, in utilities, let's take a second to talk about how this government has been impacting affordability in this province, and let's weigh that against their claims of being a government that's supposedly working in support of Manitobans. Let's talk about tuition. Tuition fees have gone up significantly and are set to go up $1,000 over the next 2 years. That, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is certainly not going to be helping Manitoban students who are already struggling to pay the bills. Nice that they get to save $50 a year on their PST costs, but taking $1,000 away from them over the next 2 years, some of the most economically challenged people in the province, probably works against this claim about being in favor of increasing affordability. Let's talk about what this government's doing in utilities. 2 years ago, their hand-picked board for Manitoba Hydro sought a 7.9% increase to hydro rates in the province. That was an unprecedented ask that would have placed a huge burden on Manitobans. Fortunately, we do have a Public Utilities Board that saw fit to reject that outrageous proposal and protected Manitobans from that significant increase. Still, what we've seen since 2016 and since this government has taken power, we've seen a 3.35% increase in 2016 to hydro rates, a 3.36 rate increase in 2017, a 3.6% increase in 2018, and yet a 3.5% increase requested in 2019. So this talk about affordability and about making Manitoba a more affordable place to live doesn't really jive very well, Mr. Deputy Speaker, with what they're doing in making hydro a basic cost for all Manitobans go up significantly over a very short period of time. Of course, we know that MPI hasn't itself escaped increases as well. Again, this government's hand-picked board for MPI have seen a 3.7% increase in 2017, a 2.6% increase in 2018, and a 2.2% increase in 2019. So, talking about affordability, talking about the basic things that cost Manitobans, the basic cost of living, these are the types of costs that most Manitobans are struggling with, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And any reference to this party being somehow more in support of working Manitobans is clearly ludicrous, given their seemingly endless interest in raising these basic costs of living. Let's talk about the cost of housing and the struggles of low-income Manitobans here in the province in dealing with rising costs of housing. We've seen, as a result of decisions of this government, 300 people have been cut from rent assist and have seen that many more have seen that rent assist support be reduced over the course of the last 3 years. That is having an increase in the cost of living for Manitobans, Mr. Deputy Speaker, who are desperately in need of that support. So we're talking about taking away some costs on one hand, but then on the other hand, we're simply moving those costs back into the laps of those low-income Manitobans who are forced to cover increasing housing costs. Talking about housing and what's happening here in the province, this government has sold off 950 units of social and affordable housing. Just down the street, Mr. Deputy Speaker, 185 Smith was a building that housed about 350 individuals, or could have housed 350 low-income individuals here in Manitoba. That apartment building has now been sold off to the private market, Mr. Deputy Speaker, no longer offering Manitobans access to social and affordable housing that we desperately require. Instead, again, sold off for profit, for a one-time gain that we will never be able to again profit from, and likely have an incredibly difficult time ever restoring that 350 units that's been sold off. This is all at a time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, when we've got 7,000 Manitobans sitting on a housing wait list. So we've sold off 900 units of social and affordable housing when we've got wait lists that are bigger than ever before. And this government has the audacity here to talk about wanting to save Manitobans money, to do more for low-income Manitobans. It's clear with every decision they're making, policy decision across countless departments, that that is not the case. Let's talk about health. I know myself, having spoken with a lot of constituents and folks on the doorstep over the course of the last summer, I met a lot of senior citizens who were staring down the barrel of significantly increased costs in dealing with personal health issues tied to joint replacements or other treatments or other procedures that we're going to require physiotherapy in order for those individuals to get to better, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This government, as we know, eliminated outpatient physiotherapy, eliminated services like foot care, and what we have now, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is lots of Manitobans who are forced to pay for these services out of pocket. And we talk about some of the services and some of the cuts that we've seen from this government, especially relating to, for example, physiotherapy. We know that this is going to have an outsized impact on lower income Manitobans who do not have personal insurance in place that will allow them to cover the gap that's been created by this government and their decision making. Again, more evidence that this government is not working for working class Manitobans. They're working for the few, not the many. Decision after decision makes this clear. Looking at seniors, I know, again, St. James is one of the highest densities of seniors of any constituency in the province, and I hear from them all the time about their affordability challenges, about the challenges that they're facing in terms of ever increasing levels of rent, about their fears about assisted living facilities and skyrocketing costs to live in facilities that will meet their needs. $3,000 a month, $2,500 a month, increasingly unaffordable, and yet this government has not built a single unit of social or affordable housing or a single unit that will help service the needs of low-income seniors in this province. Great that we're helping put $50 approximately back in their pockets through a PST reduction. Not great that we're significantly far beyond that, increasing their cost of living as a result of the decisions that are being made by this government. Let's talk about families and Manitoba families here. We've got a government that is doing absolutely nothing to create more affordable childcare spaces when we've got a growing wait list of people in the province. Instead, we're cutting $1.8 billion in government revenue, and yet we have daycares. Not only do we not have the affordable care spaces that our communities require, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we are also seeing daycares who are struggling under significant financial stresses as a result of underfunding, as a result of the struggles that are being faced because they have had funding frozen since 2016, which is de facto cut to them, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Speaking with daycares in my community, I can tell you that they are all reeling right now under the weight of those funding cuts, under that funding freeze, and are barely able to keep up. And yet, again, we've got from the member from Portage la Prairie some type of suggestion that this government is actually concerned about the challenges, the realities faced by working Manitobans. Looking at what we've seen in terms of the impacts on workers, this government imposed a wage freeze on thousands of frontline workers and has frozen the minimum wage at the rate of inflation. If you look at what's happened to the status of our minimum wage, under an NDP government, we had the 4th highest minimum wage in the country. We've fallen to 9th place, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Again, these are all creating increased struggles for working Manitobans.
The honourable member's time is up. The honourable member for Union Station.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this bill. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to the realities of so many Manitobans in regards to affordability in our province. You know, this bill purports that it will be able to save Manitobans approximately $2,020 over the next 4 years. I think it's really important, sort of echoing what some of my colleagues have already stated, certainly my colleague that represents St. James, in regards to what this government has actually been doing to negatively impact affordability for Manitobans. And I'm actually really glad that one of the members opposites talked about the working poor and makes the claim that this decrease in PST is going to help the working poor. So I appreciate that the member talked about that, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about the realities of the working poor. The fact that this government refuses to increase minimum wage to an actual living wage in a province where we see so many families, so many individuals working full-time, in many cases more than full-time, living in poverty. It was, only a matter of a few years ago when our province was 4th in the country in regards to, in regards to our minimum wage. We have fallen into ninth in the country under this government in terms of minimum wage in this country. Minimum wage has increased a mere 35 cents. That increase was last fall. It's a poverty wage. I, on a regular basis, day in and day out in my own constituency, hear from families, meet with constituents who are literally working 2 and 3 jobs, working around the clock to provide for their families, working with a poverty wage, and this government has made no efforts whatsoever to address that. And so when we talk about the working poor, let's talk about the realities of what it means to be living in Manitoba, working more than full-time, not earning an actual living wage. We need to talk about also the fact that folks who are working more than full-time, 2 and 3 jobs, have an extremely difficult time finding housing. And under this government, there hasn't been not a single unit of affordable, socially accessible housing developed. Not one single unit. And so when members opposite talk about putting more money on the kitchen tables of Manitobans, every single time they say it, I have to laugh, because it's a nonsensical statement to make when there are so many Manitobans who don't have housing. You're talking about kitchen tables and housing that doesn't exist for many Manitobans and can't be accessed by many Manitobans because this government is selling off accessible housing. This government is selling off Manitoba housing to private corporations. This government hasn't developed a single unit of affordable housing for Manitobans. I see that in my constituency in disproportionate ways in other areas, certainly in the city and surrounding areas. Some of the comments that have been made here today, and I can appreciate that everybody does want Manitobans to be able to have a more affordable way of living in this province. Every Manitoban deserves to have an affordable way of life, deserves to be able to feed their families, feed themselves, have a place to live, maybe even have a little bit of extra money at the end of the month to engage in recreation with their families. Unfortunately, due to this government's cuts, however, access to recreation is being clawed back, actually. Community centers are facing the threat of closure. We see services that are having to close their doors earlier and earlier and shutter their doors completely because of cuts under this government. Which really, when we're talking about, saving Manitobans money, those are the consequences of this government actually putting, profit ahead of people. This bill does not actually fundamentally address the root issues that members opposite in this government claim to suddenly know so much about when they talk about addressing root causes. And so, if this government wants to talk about, how we actually, over the next 4 years, next 2 years, next 1 year, make life more affordable for Manitobans, then this government needs to actually foundationally start talking about investing in areas of prevention, addressing areas that actually are root causes. When we look at the realities of how expensive not addressing the root cause of issues will become in our province, what we're going to see is that some of this decision making is going to have an actual long-term negative impact in terms of affordability for all folks in Manitoba. When we look at the realities of folks who are accessing healthcare, hip and knee replacements, no longer being able to access physiotherapy in hospital before you go home, forcing seniors to pay out of pocket for physiotherapy and for occupational therapy after major procedures. How is that putting more money on the kitchen tables of seniors in Manitoba. It's doing the exact opposite, actually. That 50-something dollars that folks are going to save around tax time is nothing in comparison to what seniors are going to have to spend, what they're already spending to pay for physiotherapy and for occupational therapy services. Which in reality, because many Manitobans can't afford those costs, that's the reality for many folks living in Manitoba, certainly many folks living in my constituency. That just forces them to make really difficult decisions around what they can and cannot pay for, and ultimately ends up costing all Manitobans more money when we see those same individuals back in the healthcare system dealing with health-related issues that simply could have been prevented had they had access to the healthcare they deserve and not been forced to pay out of pocket, and in some cases not afford to pay out of pocket in order to have those needs met. And so I'd also like to talk about a comment that was made by the Premier publicly about, I'm going to go back to minimum wage, because I think the comment really illustrates just how completely out of touch the Premier is in regards to the realities of minimum wage. Publicly stated that raising the minimum wage actually hurts young people. And I quote, "You jack up the minimum wage, you know what you do? You reduce entry-level jobs. You stop young people from being able to get into the workforce in the first place." I'm just going to read some stats here about who actually works minimum wage jobs outside of just young people. According to Statistics Canada, 38,600 Manitobans work for minimum wage, and 55% are over the age of 20. Many of the people working minimum wage jobs are women with children, and many of them are working multiple jobs to make ends meet. Certainly in the constituency that I represent, many of those folks are over the age of 50, newcomers, working 2 and 3 jobs, earning poverty wages, can't even find a place to live because there is no affordable housing, social housing being developed. And, let's hope that they don't require any sort of hip or knee replacement where they can't even access, inpatient physio or occupational therapy. They're going to have to go home and try and figure out a way to pay out of pocket when they're earning barely a living wage. That to me is unacceptable. It doesn't make sense. It literally doesn't make sense to talk about, putting more money back on the kitchen tables of Manitobans when in the same breath you are actively eliminating ways for folks to have a more affordable way of living in our province. You are actively creating more challenges and more barriers for the folks who are most disproportionately impacted by decision-making like this. You can't talk about addressing root causes and not actually, I guess you can, as evidenced by the decision-making members opposite, you can talk about addressing root causes and the importance of that and actually do the exact opposite. That to me is unacceptable, and that's the conversation that we need to be having, is how do we actually make life more affordable for Manitobans? That's investing in prevention.
The honourable member's time is up. The honourable member for St. Boniface.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. This is truly a disturbing statement. I have to I know it's always risky to try to put facts on the record in this chamber, but I'm going to do so nevertheless. The entire idea that this is that the 2020 promise is something that's going to be equally shared by Manitobans is completely untrue. The fact is, there's a
order. When this matters before the House, the honourable member for St. Boniface will have 10 minutes remaining. The hour being 12 p.m. noon. The House is recessed and stands recessed until 1:30 p.m.